The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. The disciples of John and of the Pharisees were accustomed to fast. People came to Jesus and objected. Why do the disciples of John and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Jesus answered them, can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. For the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them. Then they will fast on that day. No one sews a piece of unshrunken cloth on an old cloak. If he does, its fullness pulls away. The new from the old, and the tear gets worse. Likewise, no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the skins are ruined. Rather, new wine is poured into fresh wineskins. The Gospel of the Lord. The devil attacks in many ways. But I'd like to mention ways in which the devil attacks, and then I'd like to talk about the first reading. I'd like to talk about the priesthood. The devil will often attack Catholics to belief in the real presence. That's a temptation. That what you have in the tabernacle, what you have in the hands of the priest, it's a piece of bread. And it's a temptation. Obviously, if you're here this afternoon, if you've had that temptation, you've overcome it probably. But it could come back again, that you are tempted not to believe in the real presence. Second would be to doubt the power of the Blessed Virgin Mary. To doubt that Mary is the one that God chose to crush the head of the devil. Another two temptations that are very prominent now, I might even say three, is the devil will tempt many not to believe in the papacy. Okay, they're very strong. And when that temptation comes, you got to reject it. Is if you reject the papacy, you're no longer a Catholic. You're kind of like Boris Karloff, Frankenstein. You're walking around without any head. You can't walk around without a head. If you're decapitated, you're dead. And then a temptation against the episcopacy. And lastly would be temptations against the priesthood. All those are five of the chief temptations that are out there today in one form or another. Okay, let's talk about the priesthood. I think any young man who is called to the priesthood or is a priest is keenly aware of the fact that none of us, I repeat, none of us are worthy to be priests. You hear that? I'll repeat if you didn't hear me. None of us are worthy to be priests. When I was studying, I went to my spiritual director and said, Father, I'm not worthy to be a priest. And he said, it's not whether or not you're worthy, it's are you called? No? If you're called to be a priest, then God will give you the grace. And that calmed my fears, and 6 years later I was ordained by John Paul II. But if it were not for the help of my spiritual director, I wouldn't be here today. Because none of us are worthy to be priests, as you heard today in the first reading. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I want to give you a brief summary of the most important document written on the formation of priests in the past 100 years. I'll give you a 5-minute summary. Then I'd like to give you a model priest for us, who's already venerable, and I pray that he'll be canonized as soon as possible. Okay, if any of you are interested in the topic of the priesthood, I hope you are, you should eventually read John Paul II's Pastoris Daba Vobis. Okay, I'll repeat. Pastora Daba Vobis. Okay, that's Latin for give us pastors. Okay, in this document that John Paul II wrote in about the early 90s, he said anyone who's called to be a priest has to have 4 qualities. If he doesn't have these 4 qualities, he's not called to be a priest. It's not a tripod, but a quadrupod. You've got to get 4 legs, not just 3. Okay, the first is this. It's called human formation. Human formation. Thomas Aquinas says, grace does not destroy nature, but builds on it. That's a very famous Thomistic axiom. I repeat, grace does not destroy nature, but builds on it. Now, this would merit an hour talk, but I promise I won't give you an hour homily. But most of the human formation comes from a good family, okay? So if you have a dysfunctional family, which are probably 95% today are dysfunctional, probably. I'm not a pessimist, it's reality. But if you have a family where there's a lot of love, okay, there's a lot of harmony, there's a lot of good human virtues in the family, that is the foundation of the human foundation of a future priest. Honesty, integrity, hard work, punctuality, these are human virtues. And the second is this. A priest has to have an intellectual formation. The priest doesn't have to be an Einstein or a Shakespeare or Thomas Aquinas or Augustine, but he has to have a certain intellectual acumen or intellectual ability. No one is going to become a priest if he can't study philosophy and theology for 7 years. He's just not called. He's called to be a plumber or flip hamburgers or cut grass in the field, but he's not called to be a priest. Okay? Okay, the third is this, is that the priest, future priest, the importance of what is called spiritual formation. And I would say of all, this is the most important. And it's this. Vatican II, Presbyterian Ordinance says, what are the primary duties of the priest? I'm going to be maybe overly simplistic. The 2 P's. Are you listening? The 2 P's. Okay? It is prayer and preaching. There you have it. Okay, you hear that? Prayer and preaching. I've battled with this over time because I know some of you are thinking, well, what about the sacraments? You're right. And you could write a theological treatise on this, sacraments and preaching, what comes first? Well, okay, the sacraments, there's nothing that goes beyond the sacraments, but the reception of the sacraments depends upon us understanding the sacraments. You got me? Because if you don't know what the Eucharist is, you receive the Eucharist, and you don't know what it is. The other day I did an anniversary, 50th anniversary, And right after communion, everyone was standing up and talking. So I had to rebuke them. I kind of treated them like kindergarten kids. I said, okay, right now, listen, hey, listen. Oh, camera down, okay, phone down. Listen, sit down now. Turn off your phone, okay? You have Jesus in your heart right now, okay? Sit down now and close your eyes. Close your eyes now. For 2 minutes and talk to Jesus. And they obeyed me. They obeyed me, but I had to teach them. So you see, if I didn't give that 2-minute catechesis, everything was lost. Everything was lost. So the efficacy of the sacrament depends upon what's called the dispositive grace. The dispositive grace is how you receive the Eucharist. You can come up and receive the Eucharist and run out of the church right afterward as if your pants were on fire, okay? You know, you could. But you're not going to receive as many graces as you come before Mass, you participate, and you stay after Mass and you pray the Rosary. The graces are almost infinite. The graces are infinite. But the amount of graces is commensurate with, in direct proportion to what? Our disposition. You got me? That's why those two key elements of the priest, prayer. I often start off my day by praying for 3 hours. Yeah, that's a typical day. And that's not enough. I want to up it a notch in Lent, okay? I want to maybe go up a little bit more, no? But praying 3 hours. And then after that, I work hard. Some of you know me. I'm not afraid to work, okay? Then I work. And a lot of my work, very often from 3:30 to 8:30, I'm preaching, teaching. Catechism, adults, Hispanics, Filipinos, preaching and teaching. But it's motivated by prayer. If I don't have a prayer life, it's not going to work. Is that clear? Okay, then the last pillar would be, do any of you know? It's called pastoral. Pastoral, if I can give you another word, this very Ignatian, is to call the king. And pastoral to call the king means what? Apostolic zeal. Now, if I am brilliant, I have an excellent human formation, and I spend 12 hours on my knees, but I don't go out to try to save souls, it simply is incomplete. If you're filled with God, you want to give God to others. You hear me? So those are the 4 pillars taken from Pastora Dabo Vobis of the formation of a future priest. And then the priest has to live it out. The priest has to keep working on human formation. The priest has to keep working on intellectual formation. I've got four titles. I have a lot of education. I studied until I was 30 years old, but I recognize I know very little. I say that to people and they're shocked. You sound like a walking encyclopedia of knowledge. I know a little bit, but there's so much I don't know. And that's good, because that motivates me to study more and more and more and more and more. The more I know about God, the more I can give it to others. Okay. So did you hear me? Okay, let's end then with my model. My motivation as priest and bishop is I love Fulton Sheen. Do you? Don't you think that he's a model for priests and for bishops? Shouldn't he be canonized? Shouldn't be beatified? It's blocked because of the devil, I think, no? So I think today in the United States and the whole world, because of this crisis in the church, we have to have models. St. Alphonsus is great. St. Francis of Sales is great. Anthony Mary Claret is great. Thomas Aquinas are great. But they will always be great. But some of them lived 800 years ago. Fulton Sheen, I actually met Fulton Sheen in person. So he's one of us. My father almost knocked him down in New York when he was going out into a restaurant. Because my dad worked downtown. So Fulton Sheen is one of us. He's one of the modern men. He's a modern priest and bishop. So I invite all of you to pray for priests. Pray that we get many priests, but especially get holy priests. Amen.